November 14th, 1942. The waters off Guadalcanal lay in the particular darkness of a moonless tropical night, the kind of blackness that swallowed the horizon and reduced naval combat to something closer to a contest of instruments than of eyes. Aboard the battleship USS Washington, moving through those waters at battle speed with her sister ship South Dakota in company, Captain Glenn Davis maintained the disciplined quiet of a commander whose ship had spent months training for exactly the engagement that the night's reconnaissance report suggested was approaching. Somewhere ahead in the darkness, the Japanese battleship Kirishima moved with her own escort of cruisers and destroyers, carrying with her the accumulated confidence of an Imperial Navy that had spent the preceding months demonstrating, in the waters around Guadalcanal, a night-fighting proficiency that American surface forces had repeatedly found themselves unable to match. What followed, in the brief and violent minutes after radar contact was established and the range closed to engagement distance, would become one of the most lopsided surface actions of the entire Pacific War, a battle in which the Kirishima, a battleship of genuine fighting power and a crew of considerable experience, was reduced to a sinking wreck by a combination of gunfire so accurate and so concentrated that Japanese survivors who lived to describe it struggled, in their post-war accounts, to convey the speed with which their ship had gone from functioning warship to a doomed one. If you're watching this for the first time, subscribe and hit the bell. These are the stories that history almost forgot, and we find them every single week. To understand what happened in those minutes, one must understand the technological asymmetry that had developed between American and Japanese battleship gunnery by November 1942, an asymmetry that the preceding months of night surface combat around Guadalcanal had not yet fully revealed, because the American ships that had fought those earlier engagements had not yet been equipped with the specific innovation that the Washington carried into the Battle of November 14th. That innovation was the Mark 8 fire control radar, a system whose capability the Imperial Navy's otherwise excellent night-fighting doctrine had not been designed to anticipate and whose effect on the engagement's outcome was, by the technical analysis conducted after the war, decisive in a way that few single pieces of equipment in naval history have been. Japanese naval gunnery doctrine had been built through decades of deliberate institutional investment around the optical rangefinder and the disciplined visual acquisition of targets by extensively trained lookouts and gunnery officers. This doctrine had produced genuine results. The night actions around Guadalcanal in the preceding months, Savo Island in August, the cruiser actions of October and early November, had demonstrated Japanese gunnery crews capable of rapid, accurate fire delivered under conditions of near-total darkness, using techniques refined through years of dedicated night-fighting exercises that few other navies in the world had matched. The Kirishima's gunnery officers approached the engagement on November 14th with every reason to expect that their training and their equipment would perform as it had performed in the preceding months. What they could not have anticipated was the qualitative leap that American fire control radar represented over the optical systems that had governed every previous night engagement of the campaign. The Mark 8 radar fitted to the Washington could determine range and bearing to a target with a precision that did not depend on visual acquisition, did not degrade in darkness, and did not require the kind of sustained visual concentration that human optical observation demanded under combat stress. The system fed this targeting data directly into the ship's fire control computers, allowing the Washington's main battery of 16-inch guns to achieve firing solutions with a speed and an accuracy that the Kirishima's optical rangefinders, however skillfully operated, could not match in the compressed time frame that the engagement's opening minutes allowed. The Washington opened fire at a range of approximately 18,000 yards, a distance at which the Kirishima had not yet visually acquired the American battleship with sufficient clarity to return effective fire of her own. The first salvos from the Washington's main battery found their mark with an accuracy that post-war damage assessment would attribute directly to the radar fire control system's capability to maintain a precise firing solution despite the darkness, the relative motion of both ships, and the smoke and confusion that surface combat generates within its first minutes. Of the relatively modest number of 16-inch rounds that struck the Kirishima during the engagement, Accounts vary somewhat in the precise count, but the consensus figure of approximately 9 major caliber hits represents a remarkably small number of rounds to produce the catastrophic effect that followed. The damage inflicted was concentrated with a precision that disabled the Japanese battleship's steering, ignited fires throughout her superstructure, and flooded compartments critical to her continued operation within a span of minutes that Japanese survivors described as almost impossibly brief. The specific terror that this experience produced among the Kirishima's surviving crew, documented in the post-war accounts that Japanese naval historians compiled from survivor testimony, centered on the particular disorientation of facing an enemy whose fire arrived with an accuracy that visual conditions should not have permitted. Japanese gunnery officers, trained to expect that darkness degraded fire control performance on both sides roughly equally, found themselves facing American fire that showed no such degradation, that struck with a precision more consistent with daylight engagement conditions than with the near-total darkness in which the battle was actually being fought. This was not a matter of American gunners being more skilled in the narrow technical sense that decades of Japanese training investment had cultivated. It was a matter of American gunners being equipped with a targeting system that did not require the skill that darkness had always demanded, because the radar saw what the eye could not. The fires that spread through the Kirishima's superstructure in the minutes following the Washington's initial salvos created a secondary catastrophe that compounded the direct damage of the shell hits themselves. Japanese damage control procedures, however well-trained the crews implementing them, struggled to contain fires that the concentrated accuracy of American fire had ignited simultaneously in multiple locations, overwhelming the ship's firefighting capacity within a time frame that left little opportunity for the kind of systematic damage control response that less concentrated damage might have permitted. The Kirishima's captain, faced with a ship whose steering had been disabled and whose fires were spreading beyond his crew's capacity to extinguish them, made the decision to scuttle his vessel rather than risk her capture or her continued destruction by American fire. That showed no sign of relenting. The 7-minute time frame in which the most decisive damage was inflicted, a figure that post-war analysis of the action's timeline has established with reasonable confidence from the ship's logs and survivor accounts on both sides, represented an almost unprecedented compression of a battleship engagement's typically more extended exchange of fire into a brief, concentrated period of American accuracy against which the Kirishima's own gunnery, struggling to establish an effective firing solution against a target its optical systems could not adequately track in the darkness, produced comparatively little effective return fire. The asymmetry was total. The Washington suffered no significant damage in the engagement. The Kirishima was reduced, within minutes, from a functioning battleship to a sinking wreck whose surviving crew abandoned ship into waters that the broader battle's continuing violence made only marginally safer than the ship they were leaving. The radar set that had made this outcome possible was, in its physical reality, an unremarkable assembly of vacuum tubes, waveguides, and the antenna array mounted atop the Washington's fire control director, technology that reflected the same pattern of American industrial and scientific depth that this channel has documented across the proximity fuse, the airborne depth charge, and the integrated radar network that spanned the Pacific Theater by 1944. It had been developed, tested, and deployed to the fleet through a research and production pipeline that the Imperial Navy's own radar development program, hampered by more limited industrial resources and a research establishment that had not received the same scale of institutional investment, could not match in either the system's technical maturity or its rate of deployment to operational vessels. The Kirishima had no equivalent system. Her gunnery officers fought the engagement with the same optical techniques that had served the Imperial Navy well in previous encounters, against an enemy whose technology had, in the months since those previous encounters, advanced beyond what Japanese intelligence assessments had fully appreciated. Japanese naval officers who analyzed the Kirishima's loss in the months that followed confronted, in their internal assessments, a tactical reality that the broader pattern of the Pacific War's middle years would continue to reinforce with increasing severity. The optical rangefinder, however skillfully employed, however deeply embedded in decades of institutional training investment, had been rendered obsolete in the specific tactical context of night surface engagement by a technology that the Imperial Navy's own development programs could not produce in comparable quality or quantity. The 7 minutes that destroyed the Kirishima were not 7 minutes of superior American courage or superior American seamanship in any narrow sense that discounted the genuine skill and bravery present on both sides of the engagement. They were 7 minutes in which one combatant could see what the other could not, and the consequence of that asymmetry, compressed into the briefest possible window, was decisive beyond what either side's pre-war planning had anticipated. If this story stayed with you, leave a like, share it with someone who loves history, and subscribe if you have not already. The sailors who fought that night, on both sides, deserve to be remembered. We'll keep finding these stories,